like to introduce our speaker for this evening. It's Berquest, and he's the popular author of Cracker Crumbs, and he will sign and sell his books after the meeting, with all proceeds going to the Island Community Center. But tonight he will speak on the Manatee County's part in the famous Spanish-American War of 1898. Born in Pierce, Florida, Gibb went on to become a special agent with the FBI for 24 years. And in 1979, he and his wife, Madeline, moved back to Florida. They have 5 children and live in Holmes Beach. Gibb is the chairman of the Manatee County Historical Commission, a member of the Island Community Center Board, and the Florida Association of Museums Board. Please welcome Gibb Berquest.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. I attended the founding fathers meeting of this group way back when. When was that, Carolyn?
It was in 1990.
1990. And at that time, I wanted to get a little closer to home, so I went with the County Historical Commission and Society. Because it bordered Polk County, my home county. I don't know whether I'm going to need this mic or not. Does everybody hear me?
Yeah.
They can, all right. Now, I'm not here to sell books, but somebody asked the price of this book, so we'll get this out of the way real quick. And but here's the deal. This is a book that was written by me and published by the Anna Maria Island Community Center as a fundraiser for their endowment fund. I get absolutely not one penny from this book. Now, as tonight's special, the price of the book is $19.95. $5 of that amount will go right back to the society here. And as to sweeten up the pot, I grow croquets. Each book comes with a croquet.
Wow.
So if you're interested, I won't mention anymore, but after the meeting, if you're interested in your $5 back to the society and the rest of the community center and the croquets, we'll talk business, okay? Otherwise, I won't mention that. Right at the beginning here, too, I want to do a little gift giving. The last time I was here, I brought a couple early page pictures of Bradenton Beach. And there was some that apparently you didn't have it this time. Trader Jack's is in the foreground of this. I told you that time I was going to give you these pictures to the society, but I wanted to do a little investigative work on just exactly when they were printed. But the cracker never got around to it. So I know you have experts from Bradenton Beach here, and there's construction work going on. It's a matter of going down. This is 9th and 10th Street in Bradenton Beach, 2 different shots of the same street. And there's houses under construction. All you got to go do is down there and find out when the building permits for these buildings were sometime in the 50s, and you've solved the crackers problem. So I'd like to give these to the society.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
2, I have a Dobbs Island Hardware and Marine Supply store. Does everybody remember Dobbs?
Dobie.
Dobie, okay, D-O-B-B, that's right, D-O-B-B, yes, you're right. Dobie, yeah, and his wife was named Ike, kind of stuff, Al and Ike. And this is a paint stirrer and also a ruler. And had we listened to what's on this ruler back in the 50s, this hardware store was the first one in Holmes Beach, and was in the plaza, and this is location of where the present hardware store is. But this says, gives the fishing laws underneath the ruler here. black mullet, closed season from December 10 to January 20. Now, if we had stuck to this law back in the 50s, we certainly wouldn't have to go out and get our constitution changed to protect the mullet. But I would like to donate this paint stirrer also to you here. Why am I talking about the Spanish-American War? It's because it's the 100th anniversary of the Spanish-American War. 100 years since that war started. And to build up to it, I need to give a little background, and then we'll talk more on a local level. But I've got a lot of dates, and I don't believe in a whole lot of dates, but anyway, the first, we got to go all the way back to 1847. And there was a young man born in Hungary at that time. And he came to America, and he got here 18 years old. He was 18 years old, 1864. Just in time to join the New York 1st Cavalry for the Civil War. And he fought in that war and got a job after that as a newspaper reporter, and later became a lawyer, and then later started acquiring newspapers. We're talking about Joseph Pulitzer. He kept putting newspapers together and finally ended up with the New York World, one of the most influential papers of the world. Two, in October 27th, 1958, I remember the date because October 27th is my son's birthday. There was a young man born in New York City from very wealthy parents. And he was a sickly child. He had bad asthma, and it's a miracle that he lived through his babyhood, but his dad used to take him out in the evening, hitch up the wagon and go around Central Park in 1858 and 1859, so this child could get some fresh air, and he suffers from asthma so bad. But the young man had to be tutored at home, but he's a remarkable gentleman in that he started living in the outdoors, built himself up to be a man, went out west and lived for a while. Came back, went to Harvard, graduated Phi Beta Kappa, and his name was none other than Theodore Roosevelt. Okay, now the third person was born in, that I'm talking about, is born in 1863 and lived until the year I went into the FBI in 1951. He was born out in San Francisco, also of rather wealthy parents, and also very interested in newspapers. And his name was William Randolph Hearst. Now he built up his New York paper, the New York Morning Journal and the New York Evening Journal. Combined circulation is 1.5 million papers per day. Now that kind of beats the Islander bystander a little bit. But if you can imagine such a circulation. And then Joseph Pulitzer had the New York World, that was the competition for the other paper. Now both these papers like to print sensational material, and they got interested in what was happening down in Cuba at the time and started writing about it. They wrote about it and wrote about it, and they developed this great feeling for the people of the United States for what was happening for the poor people down in Cuba. But there were some other interests too. Cuba is kind of a, we don't realize how big Cuba is, but it's 710 miles long, that island is, 50 miles wide. We do know recently how long it took George to sail over Cuba. It took days, right? That's why that island is so long. We think it's a little island down in the Caribbean, but it's a big island down in the Caribbean. And it has a lot of wealth potential. And so the paper's interest in Cuba wasn't completely humanitarian one. There were economic reasons. So what happened with this buildup of pressure from the paper? We know how the Fourth Estate can influence the public. We saw it kind of recently in the Clinton-Bill Monica situation. They can get this country built right up with printing the same thing every day and every day. Well, the newspapers did that on this Cuban question. And so people started helping Cuba on the side by sending arms, dealing with the people in Cuba. There were some insurgents, and they started supplying these insurgents with arms and food, clothing, to promote this rise of the Cuban people in Cuba. And different from the way we use filibustering today, but if you dealt in this type thing, you were called a filibuster. If you were supplying some foreign country with aid against the laws of your own country. So filibustering started happening in Jacksonville, particularly, and Tampa. There was quite a Cuban population in Tampa because of the cigar industry. The cigar industry had moved from Cuba to Key West and then to Tampa because the HB plant brought a train into Tampa and they no longer had to ship their cigars by boat. They could send them out by the train load. And so there was quite a Cuban population there, and it became a hotbed of activity of this supplying the arms down to Cuba, this filibustering. Oh, now there was another young gentleman born in 1873. He's quite a precocious writer, and he actually lived a very short life. He died 1900, and his name was Stephen Crane. Now, Stephen Crane caught one of these filibustering boats out of Jacksonville in 1896 and was going to Cuba to cover the newspaper. He had written this famous book, and I'm sure a lot of you read it, Red Badge of Courage. And it's the story of the Civil War young man and the psychological effects on him. And he did such a realistic job that even though he was a very young man when he wrote it, newspapers hired him to go down to Cuba. Now he caught a boat in Jacksonville to go to Cuba, one of these filibuster boats. It's called the Commodore. The Commodore sailed down the St. John's River with some Cuban insurgents on board, plus guns and ammunition, and sailed down the St. John's and out into the Atlantic Ocean. But going down to St. John's, it hit a sandbar, and it sprung a leak. They didn't think it was a serious leak, but when it got about 12, 14 miles off of Daytona Beach after it reached that Gulf, the Commodore took on water and down it went. Now, if you ever want to read, and I'm sure many of you have, a piece of realistic writing by Stephen Crane, read The Open Boat. Does anybody remember reading the Oakland boat? It's the most graphic description of 4 people in a lifeboat trying to get back to shore that you can ever imagine. Now, I've just told that story to bring in the filibustering part, that we were aiding Cuba. And the way most filibusters work, they loaded up a boat with supplies, took it down to one of the key island in Keys, uninhabited island, offloaded the material, and then at night they would slip it over to Cuba. But the newspapers kept building up this idea that we ought to do something about these poor people in Cuba who were being enslaved. And finally the government decided they would send a battleship down to Havana. And they sent the battleship Maine in December 1897. And lo and behold, while that battleship was down there to protect U.S. interests, a heck of an explosion went off. And it blew the battleship Maine up right in the harbor of Havana. 266 sailors died. Now what I have here, and I just want you to hold it as it passes around, this is a piece of the battleship Maine. I get a kind of interesting feeling when I hold this piece. But it's a piece of the Maine. What happened, the Gulf Brass Company up in Tampa, after the Maine sank, went down to Havana and salvaged the boat. And they made these paperweights, and Tampa Gulf Brass gave my dad this hunk of the battleship Maine, and he has passed it on to me, and of course we'll pass it on to my son. Anyway, that is part of it. And so, what happens when the Maine gets sunk? The newspapers really got something all about. Remember the Maine. That was the war cry. And we had no intention of becoming a colonial empire, right? No. Papers, we just got to go down there and avenge our losses in Cuba after the Maine got sunk in the harbor. Well, nobody knew, and they never could pin who blew up the Maine or why it got blown up. But it has been determined now that what happened is that the Maine had a load of wet coal on it. This is just recent. In the last year, they've conducted these tests. And there's something about wet coal. It's a fossil fuel, right? It's nothing more than compressed yesteryear's trees and vegetative growth. Fossil fuel. But if it's wet, it can slowly disintegrate and give off methane gas. And if the hull of a ship is tight enough and contains this gas, and you got a spark in there, why, boom. So the theory is that we blew up the ship ourselves not by having loading it with wet coal. But that's beside the point. Of course, it's February 15th when this happened, so we have to avenge the Maine, and so April 20th we sent a notice to the Spanish government, get out of Cuba. And Spain came back and says, we're not getting out of Cuba, we're declaring war on you. And so Spanish-American War started. Now, back to the gentleman who was born in 1858, who is Teddy Roosevelt. Now, I told you about the sickly man that became a real human specimen, took up oxen, had poor eyesight, but they didn't let him stop him. And he had one shame in his family, and that was when the Civil War rolled around, his dad had a little problem because he had married this beautiful Southern belle, and this Southern belle had two brothers fighting for the Confederacy. So she says, I couldn't stand you going to war and fighting my two brothers, even though Teddy Roosevelt's dad was a able-bodied man. So at that time you could buy your way out. If you had enough money, you could go hire somebody and say, you go fight for me. And he did that. And Theodore Roosevelt, when he was in college and growing up, what did your dad do during the war? He didn't do anything. He fought his way out of it. So he was ashamed of that. His dad didn't go in and fight. He didn't have any Civil War stories. And it became an obsession with Theodore Roosevelt. So here with this war came along, the Spanish-American War. Theodore Roosevelt says, man, this is my big chance to lead a cavalry unit and get the family name back as a fighting man. So, you know the story. He formed the Rough Riders, right? He went out west, had his cowboy friends, and he got some of his aristocratic friends that he knew in Harvard, and they formed this company, a real roughneck gentleman, and they came roaring into Fort Tampa on a train. And then they ripped through the sable palms of Fort Tampa and area, training with machetes. They said, man, here's a machete. The Cubans going to know what they look like. The Spanish soldiers, instead of fighting with sabers, we're going to fight with these cane-cutting knives. And they were a fearsome group. And so Teddy got his wish. He got a lieutenant colonel's commission. They called him Colonel Roosevelt. He was really a lieutenant colonel. And he trained that group. And then out of Fort Tampa, they were ready to go to Cuba in June. And the Army, of course, set up headquarters at the Tampa Bay Hotel, which was Mr. Plant's hotel in Tampa, right? And General Shafter was in charge of, and then General Joe Wheeler. Those were the two wheels that were in command at the Spanish-American War. And they set up command in the Tampa Bay Hotel and trained the troops. Now, troop positions were set up in Lakeland, training camps for the Spanish-American War, on Lake Wire. Now, Lake Wire, it was called Lake Wire because that's where the telegraph pole was stationed, that sending we had communications between all the way from New York City to Havana with the underground cable going from Ponta Rasa, Florida, which all the way to Cuba, underground. And if those of you who have been to Santa Valal and down near Fort Myers, as you go across the causeway, leaving the mainland, that point is Ponta Rasa, but that's where the telegraph station was. Now Lake Wire still over in Lakeland is still called Lake Wire, and because of the telegraph pole that was posed, it came across the end of that lake. Now over in Lakeland, they stationed the black troops, and their leader was Lieutenant John J. Pershing. Now they called him Blackjack Pershing because he was the leader of the black troops. This name stuck to him. As you know, in World War I, head of the Allied Expeditionary Forces was General Blackjack Pershing. So That's where he got that name from, the Lakeland experience. Now up at Jacksonville, they had a camp for the Spanish-American War, and they call it Camp Cuba Libre, Camp Free Cuba. Well, that name has lived on in a rather famous drink with a little lime and a little Coke that was Coca-Cola, I should say, and a good shot of rum. That name still exists today, Cuba Libre. You can tell the bartender and he knows exactly what you're talking about. Oh, other camps were in Fernandina, another one down in Miami. But this all had to be a rush because Spanish-American War got to be known as a short and splendid war because it started on April 24th when we declared war, and it was all over and the peace sign, and by December 10th of the same year the war actually hostilities stopped on September the 18th. The Spanish said no more. Now, they got time to leave for Cuba to invade Cuba and fight the Spanish army, and so they loaded up the ships in good old Tampa Bay here, part of Manatee County, and they loaded up the ships. Now, there was no vehicles at that time other than horse-drawn vehicles, so they had to have mules for those pull the cannons and whatnot, supply wagons, no trucks, and so they loaded up the ships with the mules in the holds of the ship, and the supplies that took to carry on this expedition to Cuba and set sail. As you got one ship loaded, they were coming out of Tampa Bay, swinging right by Egmont Key, and they got word over the telegraph wire that there was 2 Spanish ships waiting for them off of Key West. So instead of going on out to sea, they started circling around Tampa Bay. Now we were talking about June, and it gets hot here in June, right? You agree with me? It gets very hot. Can you imagine down in the hold of a ship, and they already had the mules loaded, and what happened was these mules started dying just from the heat, and they started throwing them overboard, and Tampa Bay was floating with dead mules. Some of them came ashore on right here, and it was that close and that bad. And another thing that happened, the logistics were terrible in that war, and the generals had not planned it properly, and when Theodore Roosevelt got ready to go on board, they didn't have room for his horses, for his cavalrymen. They had to leave them in Fort Tampa, and so his cavalry charge, the only horse that they took was the officer's horse. And so the great cavalry Rough Riders, when they got to Cuba and fought that great battle up San Juan Hill, they did it on foot. But it was a glorious experience because T.R. Roosevelt was out there on his horse with his sword, getting them to attack the Spanish, and it was an overwhelming defeat and disaster. But it wasn't the big slashing of the machetes that they had planned on. But he became an instant hero, and when the war was over, as you know, he got back, Justin. He got back in. This was in June, and everything was all over by September. And they put him on the ballot, and he was elected governor of New York in 1898 on the Republican ticket. He's just a world hero. Well, and then he got elected on his own in the next election. So why am I so interested in Theodore Roosevelt? Well, my name is Gilbert Theodore Berquest. Okay, now, what happened? My grandparents were so enthralled and so excited about Theodore Roosevelt, their national hero, that they named one son Roosevelt Berquest and another one Theodore Berquest. So when it came time to name me here, I get the name Gilbert Theodore Berquest. Of course, I'm going to name my son Gilbert Theodore Berquest, which I did. I have two sons. Then he has since named his son Gilbert Theodore Berquest III. And so here this Theodore thing is going right on into the 20th century, 21st century, I should say. It's all from the account of the fact that Teddy Roosevelt's dad didn't fight in the Civil War. So, and also just as if you look on ABC television, anybody here, I'm a Gator fan. I went to the University of Florida. Does anybody here happen to be a supporter of FSU, the Seminoles? There. But during the Seminole games, if you're on ABC, somewhere during that game time, you will see a gentleman who has his head shaved, and he's got the symbol of FSU on his dome painted on there. And that gentleman is none other than Gilbert Theodore Berquest III.
You know what they did to you, Jim?
And they call him Head to Head. And so then you ask, why am I interested in Stephen Crane, and tell that story about the Commodore and the filibustering that went on just before the war. I have a wonderful friend over in Ormond Beach, Florida, and he's a diver. And they have located the Commodore 14 miles off of Mosquito Inlet. And when I go over to his house, he always has something new that came from the Commodore. And he's saving it and collecting it there for a museum. But he's got some beautiful portholes with the glass still intact. And some of the guns that were heading on the way to Cuba, piles of ammunition that are still there. Now, what's my connection with Pulitzer? Nothing really. I'm still waiting for that Pulitzer Prize. It's not liable to happen. But you know, Pulitzer went on after the war and gave $1 million to Columbia University for their School of Journalism, and also started the Pulitzer Prizes for literature. Now, what's my interest in William Hearst? What's his full name? Randolph. Yeah, William Randolph Hearst. Well, he died in 1951, as I told you. Well, that was the year I went into the FBI. But he had a granddaughter, Patricia Hearst. I'll get it right. Patty Hearst, Patricia Hearst. Now, she got kidnapped by the Seminole Liberation Army, and she started helping them rob banks. And you probably remember the picture of Patty Hearst standing there with a machine gun. Yeah. So my Hearst connection is that we in the FBI lost track of Patty Hearst, and we had a hard time finding her. Finally did locate her, but she had one of those classic stories of being kidnapped by an enemy and then falling in love with the enemy and serving the enemy. And so we put out for the first time a wanted flyer for Patty in the Spanish language and sent it all over South America because we had some good leads that maybe Patty and Company was in South America. Well, my dear wife made the first FBI wanted poster for Patty Hearst that was ever made in Spanish. So that is the local connection there. Now, what else happened in the Spanish America? I know my time has probably run out here. All right, I'm going to finish up.
Don't worry about it.
The other things were happening in the Spanish American War. We said we were not going down there to help the Cubans to become, only to set them free and not become an empire. And we did go down there and we did set the Cubans free. But unfortunately, 100 years later, the Cuban people are not free. Think about it. At the Bay of Pigs, we let Cuba down horribly, and we didn't get rid of Castro. The Cuban people are in as dire straits now as they ever were. And while our big motive was to free the Cuban people, we haven't really done it. Now, what happened in the Philippines during the Spanish-American War? Well, we know what happened there. Admiral Dewey bottled up the fleet in Manila and wiped it out. And so here now we got the Philippines, we freed Cuba, and we're not trying to build an empire, but we said, well, there's another Spanish colony out there that's, let's go take Guam. So we took Guam. Now, there's another beautiful island down in the Caribbean, and it's called Puerto Rico. Now, the newspapers weren't too concerned about Puerto Rico, but the same thing that was happening in Cuba was happening in Puerto Rico generally. But Puerto Rico was 1,000 miles southeast of Miami and not 90 miles from the Keys like Cuba is. So, and this is a smaller island. It's only 100 miles long and 40 miles wide. However, there was over 500,000 people living on that island. And we said, oh, well, this is easy picking. Let's go down and pick up Puerto Rico, which we did. General Miles landed there with no resistance on the side of Guanica and took over the whole island. Now, 100 years later, we didn't set Puerto Rico free, right? It became our island empire. 100 years later, Puerto Rico is not free. We did give it Commonwealth status in 1951, but 100 years is a rather long time to settle an issue. What we really have to do is either accept Puerto Rico as a state, we continue the Commonwealth status, or for the first time in 500 years, let it be free. So that's a question that we're going to have to carry over into the 20th, first century. What's my interest in Puerto Rico? My wife is from Puerto Rico. That's my interest there. Now, I don't know, let's see what time is it. So boy, I've gone 8:15. It's a long time. All right. Now, I was going to tell a crack story, but I think I better forego that. Does anybody have any questions about the Spanish-American War? The main thing, not much was accomplished. Yes.
My question was, is Egmont Key, were any defenses set up there to protect the harbor?
Yeah.
During the Spanish War?
During the Spanish War. The forts were actually not built till after the Spanish-American War, but the island was occupied by, for years and years, as well during the Civil War, and it had both sides, because we had to guard that interest into Tampa Bay during the Civil War. It was a refuge for people that didn't want to be on the Confederate side, you know, it was a place to go. So it finished in strongly. Now, on a local level, June Alder, of course, has kept us advised. She wrote in the recent issues of the Highlander these beautiful stories about Lady Mabel Williams, and she was a spy for the American forces during the Spanish-American War. And I don't want to even get close. I love that lady, and I love her writings, and I read her column, and I don't want to touch her territory. I don't. She has covered it so well. Locally, of course, while the troops were here, what Manatee County did, we had to support, you know, the encampment in Tampa and Port Tampa and all the way down to Manatee County, where the troops were. We had to supply them with food, grocers, mostly green grocers, and beef. Manatee was, and still is, a great beef growing country, and supplied beef for the expeditionary forces. And recruiting people from Manatee County was no problem. As Captain Cobb and Company C of the U.S. Volunteers recruited here and over in Bartow and Lakeland and whatnot. And so we were very much involved. It was a popular war because we thought we were really doing something by freeing the Cuban people. And also we were just kind of ready for a fight too. And then we found out that it was pretty easy pickings. But what this did, it made the United States a world power. Everybody looked to us now, man. We got a Navy out there that can really fight. We defeated the Spanish fleet. And since then, we have been a world power. So even though our motives weren't right, in other words, here's a colony of Cuba, been under Spanish rule for 400 years. Puerto Rico had been under Spanish rule for 400 years. And we came in and suddenly said, well, we're going to set you free, but we haven't. But it did make us a world power, yes.
If you still have close connections with Puerto Rico, what is the feeling do you get of most citizens there wanting or not wanting statehood?
Yeah, okay, that's a wonderful question. And I think it's about split about, you know, close to half and half on whether we're going to remain Commonwealth or whether we would go statehood, and then another small percentage want independence. Now, I would say the problems in Puerto Rico is that these people are U.S. citizens, but they can't vote in a national election. None of them ever voted. The only way they can come and vote for a national election is move up to the states and register. So they don't have the vote. They do make their own laws, except that federal law extends over Puerto Rico too. They have the federal courts, and while they do have a certain amount of freedom to make their own laws, they still have this overriding federal law to contend with, so they're not really free. But it's mixed, and they're going to have another referendum soon. But it would be easier if Congress would say, hey, look, you know, they didn't have a referendum in Hawaii when they became a state, or they didn't have one in Alaska when they became a state. And Congress just said, we want you for a state. So we have some decisions to make. But the problem there is, unfortunately, in Puerto Rico, they have extended food stamps there, Medicare, all the programs, and nobody, once you get that, you ever want to give it up. But I think it would be wonderful It's the people of Puerto Rico who are the educated people there. They have 5 universities on the island. The educated people have a chance to govern that island themselves after 500 years of serving another master. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to wind it up here, and if anybody is interested in a book, I'm going to be sitting here and sell the book. Thank you very much.